Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start our video with a story about a petty neighbor who loved to play harmless tricks until karma came blowing in his direction, quite literally. Neighbor has long history of petty things, so I rotate a few fans 90 degrees. I used to live on the edge of a farm, and people used to rent my space out. This is important. My neighbor, Bob, is a nice enough guy to your face, self-proclaimed, morally upstanding religions man, occasionally petitioned to make some changes to state government to his worldview, and all around chatty when I have the infrequent pleasure to bump into him. Except he's a dingus and does petty crap all the time. I don't think he's aware that I know he does. While some are aggravating, most are perplexing and barely illegal and wouldn't be worth my effort to get the law involved. These are his stories. Once spent all day Saturday loading leaves onto a flatbed trailer. Now, Bob has a lot of property. Where does he put the leaves? He pulls out of his driveway, just gets past the corner of my front yard. Note I have more property where the grass ends, and hits the gas. Leaves blow off to both sides of the road. He turns around at the corner and pulls back into his driveway. Once had an apprentice surveyor come and practice surveying skills to mark the line. Said because he wasn't official, it wasn't, but it was 99% correct on it. Bob goes out one day and moves the markers off his driveway. I took pictures of the locations and made a note. Planted popple trees, fast-growing, just on my side of the line fence, so they'd provide coverage for his pine trees to grow. I was annoyed, but figured if they gave me quicker coverage from him, I'd just deal with it. They've since gotten huge, and some are dying off. I saw Bob outside once and asked him about the limbs falling, and he said they were on my side, so not much he can do. Every time I picked up limbs, I just tossed them back to his yard, and they'd eventually disappear to his burn pile. Would you guess is sitting at the corner of our property together? Bob had a delivery of a huge piece of equipment. Because his driveway is small and not really usable for the long bed delivery truck, he told the delivery guy to just park and unload in my wide driveway, making big ruts because of the weight of the machinery. To the delivery driver's credit, he didn't know any better. He said the neighbor said it was fine to use my driveway. One time I heard a bunch of noise early one morning. Bob's 12-year-old son at the time has a tractor with a piece of equipment backed up to my garage bag pile by the road. Trash coming in a few hours, and there's a bag hanging off the edge of the equipment. Son's jamming the raised lower level to try and shake the bag loose. I called out and asked what he was doing and went out to see. Bob's son froze, and I asked him what it was. He wouldn't say. I opened the bag to find a deer head with maggots on it. Bob didn't want this in his trash, and it's illegal, so decided to just put it in mine. I told Bob Jr. to tell his dad that if he did this again, he'd find it in his swimming pool and made his son take it back home. Bob never said anything about it. This is all I can think of at the top of my head, but I think you get his quasi-innocent, if not extremely annoying things he does. Petty, some would say. So fast forward 20-something years of this, and I strike a deal to let Farmer John put up some grain bins at my house, which happened to be the farthest point from my house and next to Bob's property at the corner where his house is at. These have huge fans. When they're doing the constructing, John mentions they would rather point them west towards Bob's house and not north because it would be more convenient to them as the fans protrude a bit from the bins, but didn't want to sour my relationship with Bob. I assure him Bob and I have a special relationship, and I insist he points them to the west because Bob wouldn't care. Fast forward months, and John actually uses grain bins, which he typically runs the fans at night when it's cool. The first morning after Bob knocks on my door and says he heard the fans last night and said he didn't realize they'd be pointing towards his property, his house, and where his bedroom face. I said I didn't really think about it, just told them to put them where it would work best for them. Bob asked if they could be moved, and I said not without a crane rental, a team of men, and several days' worth of labor. I offered to get him a quote. Bob just mumbled, "That's okay," and left. Every time the fans ran after that, it was the peaceful, gentle white noise in the distance to lull me right to sleep. Bonus. When Bob saw all the dirt and construction going on and asked what was being built, I said Farmer John was putting up a 1,000-head pig shed He just said, "Oh, okay." The next day, my township supervisor called to ask me about zoning issues and said he had a permit for bends, not a shed. Bob sounds like the kind of guy who people will one day say, "We had no idea. He was such a nice man," after a mass shooting. And our second story. Outperforming store staff. So my boss is on a work trip in Toronto and called me just to check in how things were going here. He was having a riot with this day and was laughing up a storm. Apparently he'd forgotten to pack underwear and not enough dress shirts for his trip. Single 40-year-old guy, so no one to help him pack. So he popped out to some store to go and get himself some more clothes. Now, let me preface this with, when we're working, he's always casually dressed, but when he's at a meeting, he looks top tier. Always. And the man's a silver-tongued devil. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. His tale told to me he was at the store browsing some dress shirts when an older man came up to him in the store asking about hats that were on the wall beside the shirts. His automatic answer was, "Well, let's take a look at what they have." After spending 5 minutes browsing, the other guy found a hat and was questioning sizes, and the boss's answer was, "Well, let's see what size this is," and checked the inside of the hat, which yielded promising results. But my boss, always looking for fun, said to the guy, "This hat's great. It looks great on you, but you should get two. You should get another one in a different color because this color is for this kind of social situation, but this color is for that kind of social situation." Of course, he talked the man into buying 2 overpriced hats at this high-end dress store. Said the hats were a couple $100. Then, 15 minutes later, when my boss found his clothes and was ready to pay, he stood in line right behind the guy he just upsold. The guy looked at him and was, "You don't work here, do you?" And my boss smiled and said, "No, I was just doing some shopping." At which point the other guy turned beet red and paid for his hats and bolted. The manager was on the till, chuckling, and said, "You upsold better than any of the staff who work here." I sure hope the store manager gave your boss a discount based on the commission he should have earned selling those 2 expensive hats. And our last story. Your pool is now HOA property. I moved to this area about 5 years ago. We bought the biggest and oldest renovated house around. Our house is the original building from the 1950s. I guess the previous owners sold the surrounding land for the other homes. No one else here has a big driveway and a pool like we do. Now on to the story. At first, everything started off pretty harmlessly. A few neighbors decided to band together to improve our neighborhood. They collected $50 a year, a totally reasonable amount. With that money, they cleared snow from the roads, put out trash containers in the spring, and hosted summer barbecues for anyone interested. Everything was friendly without any official paperwork or obligations. But then everything changed. A bored housewife named Mary, who seemed to have nothing else to do, decided to become the president of this makeshift HOA. Suddenly, there were elections, meetings, ballots, and of course, the first item on her agenda was a 200% increase in dues. Now it costs $200 a year. Someone clearly has math issues. One evening, she knocked on my door. "Hello, I'm Mary, the president of our HOA." "Hello," I replied, trying to figure out the purpose of her visit. "You've accumulated overdue dues to our HOA. I'd like to discuss payment options with you." I looked at her in surprise. "Sorry, but I'm not a member of your HOA. And honestly, I don't intend to be." "But you use the roads in our neighborhood, don't you?" "Yes, I do, just like all the other residents. But the roads are public and I pay property taxes, which I assume go toward their maintenance." She squinted at me. "Our HOA has taken responsibility for maintaining the roads. If you use them, you're obligated to pay dues." I sighed. "Listen, Mary, I appreciate your initiative, but I haven't signed up for any obligations. Please don't bother me about this anymore." She turned sharply and left, muttering something under her breath. A few weeks went by, and I noticed new road signs popping up in our neighborhood, huge, bright, and completely out of place for a quiet residential area. Later, I found out they spent $10,000 of HOA dues on them. We have only 4 intersections, and now each one looks like a miniature city center. That evening, I ran into my neighbor Evan, who was involved with the HOA. "Hey, Evan, are you aware of these new signs?" He nodded, looking a bit embarrassed. Yeah, Mary insisted on installing them. She says it'll improve neighborhood safety. Safety? We have cars passing by once an hour. It's a complete waste of money. Evan shrugged. I agree, but most people at the meeting supported her idea. I shook my head. She also came to me demanding I pay dues for using her roads. Evan sighed. Yeah, she's become really pushy lately. A lot of people are unhappy, but no one wants to argue with her. Sometime later, I received a letter stating that I'm required to pay an additional fee for having a pool on my property if I don't plan to make it available for common use by HOA members. This was too much. I decided to talk to Mary again. I went to her house and rang the doorbell. She opened the door, looking slightly surprised. Oh, hello. The lost sheep has finally decided to visit me, she said in a haughty tone. I said, Mary, I received a letter from you demanding payment for my own pool. Are you serious? She crossed her arms over her chest. Yes, it's a decision by our HOA. If you have resources you're not sharing with the community, you need to compensate financially. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is absurd. My pool's on my private property. You have no right to demand money from me because I don't let strangers use it. She smiled. We have a democratic community and decisions are made by the majority. I held back the urge to raise my voice. Mary, your HOA has no legal authority. I didn't sign any documents or agree to participate. Please stop trying to drag me into your schemes. She raised an eyebrow. Well, we'll see what everyone else thinks about this. The next day, I noticed a sign had been placed on my lawn. This house does not support the community. This was crossing the line. I called over my neighbor Serge, with whom I had a good relationship. Serge, did you see this? I pointed to the sign. He nodded. Yeah, Mary told everyone you're refusing to participate in neighborhood activities, and this will serve as a lesson to everyone. She's a bit unhinged. He looked guilty. I said, okay, well, I'll try to sort this out. I called the city administration and told them about the situation with the roads and the unauthorized installation of signs. They promised to look into it. A few days later, city officials showed up in the neighborhood. They talked to residents and inspected the new signs and roads. Turns out Mary hadn't obtained any permits for changes to the infrastructure. That same evening, Mary approached me, looking furious. Was it you who called the city administration, you son of a bee? I calmly looked at her. Yes, it was me. And by the way, this is my land where you put your sign without asking, Mary. She flared up. You're destroying our community. Why can't you just be a part of the team, you freaking jerk? Because it's fun. Now get off my property. She stepped back. You'll regret this. A few days later, I received a letter from the city administration stating that all unauthorized changes in the neighborhood must be removed and those responsible may face administrative penalties. Mary tried to convene an emergency HOA meeting, but many residents had already started to realize her actions were illegal. Some even came up to me to apologize for not stepping in earlier. I later found out the HOA was disbanded, though officially it never existed. Seeing that shed get torn down felt like sweet, sweet victory.